The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Fred eased his sedan into the long, tree-lined driveway. Evening light draped the villa in molten gold, catching on glass windows that shimmered against the backdrop of Lake Tahoe. For a moment, it looked untouched, eternal. Exactly as he remembered it with Elizabeth. He could almost see her, cardigan wrapped around her shoulders, waving from the terrace with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. But she wasn't there. She hadn't been for 3 years. Fred tightened his grip on the steering wheel, the silence in the car pressing against his chest. The villa wasn't just a vacation home. It was memory solidified in brick and timber, the last piece of his wife he could still touch. Every tile, every carefully chosen lamp, carried her fingerprints. He'd come here tonight to feel close to her, to ease the heaviness that still gnawed at him when San Diego nights grew too quiet. He killed the engine. The world hushed. Pine trees whispering, waves lapping the shore, peace, finally. Then he heard laughter. A woman's laugh, sharp and careless, spilling from the terrace. He frowned, climbing out with his overnight bag slung across one shoulder. The front steps groaned under his weight, familiar as the sound of an old friend's voice. But when he looked up, the image froze him where he stood. 2 figures lounged on his terrace in white robes. A bottle of wine sweated between them, glasses raised like they owned the sunset. His daughter, Kelly, tilted her head back, her laughter catching in the breeze. Beside her sat Palmer, her husband, wearing that same strained smile Fred had never quite trusted. Fred's breath caught. The bag slid from his fingers, thudding against the stone. "Dad," Kelly's voice cut through the dusk, not warm, not surprised, cold. "You shouldn't be here," he blinked. "What do you mean, shouldn't be here? This is my house." Kelly rose slowly, her robe cinched around her, and leaned against the railing. There was no trace of the girl who once clutched his hand at her mother's funeral, no softness from the child who used to curl against him for bedtime stories. Her eyes, dark and sharp, were a stranger's. "Not anymore," she said. "Palmer and I are staying here now. You need to respect that." The words struck harder than a physical blow. For a second, he thought he must have misheard. The villa, his villa, was more than property. It was the life he had built for Elizabeth. And his daughter, his only child, was dismissing him like an uninvited guest. Fred took a step forward, voice trembling. "Kelly, I drove 2 hours to be here. I just wanted." Her hand cut through the air, silencing him. "Don't make this ugly. We were here first, you can come back some other time. Call me first next time, okay?" Behind her, Palmer shifted, avoiding Fred's eyes. The wine glasses clinked. The terrace doors closed. And Fred Martinez stood alone in the driveway of the home he had built, as if he were a stranger trespassing on his own life. Fred didn't sleep that night. He drove back to San Diego under a sky that seemed too wide, headlights carving tunnels through the dark highway. His hands stayed clenched on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, replaying the scene in endless loops. The villa, his sanctuary, his wife's memory, his daughter's betrayal. By the time dawn broke, exhaustion pressed into his bones, but his mind refused to rest. He sat in his study surrounded by Elizabeth's framed photographs. One captured her at the villa's terrace, sunlight tangled in her hair, smiling as if nothing in the world could touch them. He traced the frame with a thumb and whispered, "I tried, Liz. I really tried to be patient with her." The phone rang. Kelly. For a split second, hope rose, maybe an apology, some flash of the daughter he remembered. He answered, "Dad, listen carefully." Her tone was clipped, businesslike. "Palmer and I talked. We've decided the villa belongs to his parents now." The words landed like stones. Fred froze. "Kelly, what are you talking about? They need a proper place to live. You hardly use it anyway." "It makes sense. It's theirs now. So, please, don't go back there. Please." His laugh was bitter. "That villa is my life's work. Your mother's dream. 30 years of sweat. And you're, what, giving it away? You're being selfish," she snapped. "After everything I've done for you since Mom died." Fred's chest burned. "Everything you've done for me. I paid your tuition, your wedding, your car, your apartment. I bent until I broke just to keep you comfortable. That's what fathers do." She shot back. "And you don't even need the villa anymore. Your old dad, alone. Why keep it when it could help a family who actually deserves it?" Silence filled the line, heavy and jagged. Elizabeth's voice flickered in memory, "Be patient with her, Fred. She's grieving." But this wasn't grief. This was calculation. Cold, sharp, final. Something hardened inside him. "No, Kelly," he said, voice low and steady. "The answer is no." The pause on the other end was deafening. Then came the hiss. "You can't say no to me." But he already had. Fred hung up, his hand trembling as he set the phone down. The room felt charged, the air too thin. For the first time in years, he hadn't caved. He hadn't folded under her demands. His pulse thundered with fear and something else. Power. That night, sleep still wouldn't come. He stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks, counting the years he had surrendered to guilt and loneliness. Then, as the hours stretched, a clarity sharpened. This wasn't just about a house. It was about a man who had forgotten how to protect himself. By morning, Fred Martinez knew. If his daughter wanted war, she had chosen the wrong opponent. By Tuesday morning, the silence in Fred's study had turned into something alive. Buzzing, restless, refusing to let him sink back into despair. He'd spent the weekend pacing, rehashing Kelly's words, feeling them bruise deeper with every replay. "You're old. Alone. You don't need it." But grief had limits. Patience had an expiration date. He straightened his tie in the mirror, and almost startled himself. His reflection looked different, tired, yes, but sharper. Eyes lit with a fire he hadn't felt since his construction days, when every deal was a battlefield and every signature on a contract was won, not given. Enough. He drove downtown, the city humming with weekday energy, and stepped into the glass and steel office of Marcus Chen, his longtime attorney. Marcus had shepherded him through business expansions, lawsuits, and zoning battles. If anyone could arm him now, it was Marcus. "Fred," Marcus greeted warmly. But the smile faded as he took in his client's expression. "What's going on?" Fred lowered himself into the chair, the leather groaning. "I need to make sure no one, not even my daughter, can touch my villa." Marcus raised a brow, his pen poised. "Family dispute." Fred's silence was answer enough. For the next hour, Marcus laid out options: trusts, LLC shields, charitable transfers. The legalese rolled on, but Fred's mind wasn't drifting the way it once would have. He wasn't the broken widower anymore. He was listening, calculating, filing away leverage. "Can this be done quickly?" Fred asked finally. "If you're motivated, yes. Days, not weeks. Then start today." As he left the office, sunlight poured across the harbor. Sailboats cut through the water like blades, steady and sure. Fred inhaled, the air sharp in his lungs. For the first time since Elizabeth's funeral, he felt alive with purpose. But legal armor wasn't enough. That night, in the quiet of his neighborhood, he walked next door to Derek Collins' house. Derek was a 30-something tech engineer, always tinkering, always surrounded by screens and wires. Fred had once helped him fix a flooding basement, and Derek had never stopped insisting he owed him a favor. When Fred explained what he needed, a special security system, something more persuasive than locks, Derek's eyes lit with childlike glee. "You want the house to fight back?" "Exactly," Fred said. 2 hours later, they were in Derek's garage, surrounded by motion sensors, speakers, projectors, and enough smart home equipment to wire a small fortress. Plans spilled across the workbench, lights that strobed on command, voices that could boom from hidden speakers, shadows that could dance across walls like ghosts. Fred watched, half amused, half astonished, as Derek built a nightmare out of ordinary technology. And somewhere between the tangled cords and blinking lights, Fred realized the truth. This wasn't just about scaring intruders. It was about reclaiming himself. His daughter thought he was weak. She thought grief had hollowed him out forever. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The villa sat in silence, but inside, it had been reborn. Wires threaded beneath baseboards. Sensors blinked in corners invisible to the casual eye, and hidden speakers waited like coiled snakes. Derek moved through the rooms with a grin, tablet in hand, adjusting the system one final time. "Try walking into the living room," he said. Fred stepped forward. Instantly, the lights flickered into a rapid strobe. A deep, mechanical voice thundered from the ceiling. "Unauthorized entry detected. Leave immediately." The water burst from the kitchen faucet. Shadows slithered across the walls as if something unseen stalked the space. Fred froze, heart pounding, not from fear but exhilaration. He had spent 3 years drowning under silence, surrender, and guilt. Now the house itself breathed with him, alive, armed, and unyielding. "Damn." Derek laughed. "That's nightmare fuel." Fred nodded slowly. "It's perfect." By Saturday evening, the trap was set. Cameras fed live streams to monitors in his study 200 miles away. Every angle of the villa glowed in crisp high definition. The systems hummed quietly, waiting. Fred sat in the dim light of his office, Elizabeth's photograph at his elbow. Her eyes smiled back at him, steady, kind. He pressed a hand against the frame. "I wish it hadn't come to this, Liz," he whispered. "But you'd never want me to roll over and lose everything." Not to her. The phone buzzed. A text from Kelly. "Dad, Palmer's parents are moving in tomorrow. Please don't embarrass yourself. It's done." Fred stared at the message, lips curling into a grim smile. Sleep came in shallow bursts, each dream haunted by the echo of Kelly's voice, the daughter he had raised to believe love meant endless sacrifice. He remembered her as a child, eyes swollen with tears at Elizabeth's funeral, clutching his hand as though she'd never let go. That girl was gone. In her place stood someone colder, sharper, demanding pieces of him until nothing remained. Was he really prepared to terrify his own flesh and blood? The question gnawed at him as dawn crept in. He poured coffee, sat back in his leather chair, and forced himself to face the truth. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about boundaries. He had given everything, and she had called it not enough. A father's love without self-respect wasn't love, it was surrender. At 10:28 p.m., Sunday, the driveway camera caught headlights. A van rolled up with the arrogance of ownership. Kelly stepped out first, her voice carrying through the audio feed. "Welcome home." A Palmer followed, dragging luggage. His parents, Carl and Margaret, shuffled behind, their faces glowing with eager anticipation. They weren't visiting, they were relocating. Fred's pulse hammered as he leaned closer to the monitors. 4 figures marched toward his door, chatting about room choices, already speaking of the villa as theirs. Kelly's smile was triumphant, dismissive, final. She didn't know. None of them knew. The house was waiting. And so was he. The first door creaked open at 300 p.m. Sharp. Through the monitor, Fred watched Kelly stride into the villa as though she were presenting a gift to royalty. "This is it," she said proudly, ushering Palmer's parents across the threshold. "Yours now." Margaret's eyes widened at the vaulted ceilings. Carl whistled low, dragging a suitcase across the polished floor. Palmer followed, carrying groceries, already imagining dinners in a stolen kitchen. Fred's jaw tightened. He hovered his thumb over the tablet, pulse quickening. He could end it now, but he waited. Let them unpack. Let them believe. Minutes stretched into an hour. Kelly strolled the rooms, narrating like a realtor. Palmer set wine glasses on the counter. Margaret unwrapped a porcelain angel, placing it on the mantel as if christening the space. That was the moment. Fred pressed execute. The villa came alive. Every light blazed white, then stuttered into a violent strobe. Faucets roared open, unleashing torrents that splashed against the tile. The security system's voice thundered from the walls. "This property belongs to Fred Martinez. You are trespassing," Margaret screamed. Carl stumbled backward, clutching his chest. Palmer dropped the glasses, shards exploding across the floor. "Dad!" Kelly shrieked into the empty house, spinning wildly. "Dad, what are you doing?" Fred said nothing. He simply watched. Shadows rippled across the walls, elongated figures pacing, bending, whispering. The projectors cast silhouettes that moved independent of the family's frantic gestures. Speakers hissed with whispers that seemed to crawl along the ceiling. "Get out, get out, get out." Palmer yanked at the front door. The smart lock clicked, sealed. He cursed, pounding the handle. Kelly clawed at her phone, but the signal jammed, calls dropping before they could ring. Water erupted upstairs. A shower ran at full blast, echoing like thunder through the beams. Margaret clutched her porcelain angel, shaking as if it might shield her. Carl shouted, "This house is cursed." "No, it's just Dad." Kelly hissed, though her voice cracked with fear. "He's doing this somehow." Another command boomed through the walls, deeper, angrier, "Leave this house, now." Fred leaned forward, breath sharp in his chest. For years, Kelly had spoken over him, reduced him to silence. Tonight, his house spoke in his stead, louder, firmer, undeniable. The family scattered from room to room, chased by lights that flickered in pursuit, by shadows that lunged with phantom intent. Margaret collapsed near the staircase, sobbing. Palmer dragged her upright, shouting for an exit. Kelly's defiance dissolved into panicked gasps, her robe drenched from spraying faucets. And still, Fred did not stop the system. Because this was not just punishment, it was revelation. His daughter, who once believed her father's love was limitless currency, now knew he could say no, and mean it. Finally, when their screams turned ragged, he tapped release. The locks disengaged with a sharp click. The four of them bolted into the daylight, stumbling across the driveway, soaked and trembling. Kelly turned back once, eyes wild, lips forming a single word "why." Fred stared at the screen. His own reflection stared back in the glass, older, harder, but finally unbroken. And for the first time in years, he did not feel the need to answer her. The monitors glowed with silence. The villa stood still again, every faucet dry, every bulb dim. The last trace of shadows dissolved into ordinary walls. Fred sat in the hush of his study, listening to his own breath fill the room. For 3 years, he had been a man reduced, patient to the point of erasure, bending until nothing of himself remained. Tonight, the bend had snapped, and in the break, he had found himself again. His phone lit up. Kelly. He let it ring. Then a text arrived. "You'll regret this. We'll never forgive you." Fred stared at the words, then set the phone face down on the desk. Forgiveness, he realized, was no longer currency he needed. He had spent too long paying for love with silence. The next morning, sunlight poured across Lake Tahoe as he drove north. The villa rose between the pines, serene as ever, as though it hadn't just hosted a battle between past and present. Fred unlocked the door, his own key fitting with a clean, unquestionable click. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and lake water. He moved slowly through the rooms, past the kitchen where Margaret had screamed, past the living room where Kelly's bravado had cracked. No shadows now, only sunlight warming the wood floors. He paused at the terrace, resting his palms against the railing. Elizabeth's absence pressed at him, but for the first time, it wasn't suffocating. It was presence of another kind, guidance, steadiness. "You'd be proud of me, Liz," he murmured. Not for scaring them, but for finally saying no. By noon, he was in his lawyer's office again, a stack of papers spread across polished oak. Marcus slid the final document forward. "With this," the attorney said, "the villa is transferred to the foundation. You'll retain lifetime access, but legally, they'll never touch it." Fred signed without hesitation. The pen moved smoothly, his hand steady. He had built buildings, roads, towers, but this signature felt like the truest construction of his life. That evening, he returned to the villa alone. The tech Derek had installed was boxed away, stripped from the walls, leaving nothing but stillness. Fred brewed coffee, carried the mug to the terrace, and sat facing the water. The lake shimmered under the setting sun, each ripple catching fire. He breathed it in. Peace, earned at last. He thought of Kelly. The child who once clung to him was gone, replaced by someone who saw him only as leverage. Could that ever change? Perhaps. But it was no longer his duty to collapse under her weight. Love without respect was not love. A bird cut across the horizon, wings slicing the orange sky. Fred followed its arc, steady and sure. Some bonds break. Some homes must be defended. Some battles cannot end in reconciliation but only in the quiet dignity of survival. He lifted the mug in a small, private toast. To Elizabeth, to himself, to the man he had rediscovered. The lake answered with silence, vast and eternal, holding him the way memory once did. And for the first time since she died, Fred felt whole.